I don't know that I did this all intentionally. I think sometimes culture becomes a byproduct of who's ever in leadership.
Mhm.
I mean, like, it's just going to start there. If there's a certain sort of energy that this person's giving to it, a certain openness, then that's going to trickle down into all the ranks, right? That's how you should be leading, right?
Mhm.
So how you train, how you present yourself, everything else, that sort of, it should be the sort of the model that people can follow after. If you're not going to embody this stuff yourself, then it's like a parent telling your kid, hey, you need to eat better and you need to stop eating this bad food, meanwhile they're eating a Big Mac.
All right. Morning. It's Catherwood.
Hey.
We have Chewy, Mr. Chewy. Thanks for joining the show. Appreciate having you on. Yeah. So excited for this one, kind of get into some things. Like, we talked to a lot of different people of all different levels, but I think really one of the themes of the podcast, we're trying to get a lot of high performers, high achievers out there. And I just thought it'd be a really interesting podcast. We do have some crossover with some combat sport athletes or jiu-jitsu folks that may be tuning in. So I think they'll know who you are. But for those who don't, I think a couple of things, that I was kind of interested in getting into today was, of course, your jiu-jitsu career, walking through that kind of progression where you started and all that good stuff and your accomplishments. But also, I think a combination of, the gym is pretty well known that you train at. A lot of people have a lot of comments to that, and just kind of talk a little bit about that culture. I think it can cross-reference it other people's lives also. And then, also just your vision with the Chewjitsu Open. So I think, like, a lot of times there's a lot of, and Mike, a lot of similar kind of combat sport or athletes that have crossed over in the business world, the entrepreneurial side of things, and had like that crossover success. So I think those are some common threads just for those tuning in, of a couple of reasons why I wanted to have Chewy on and just kind of unpack some of those things together to see if we can give some people some actionable things, ways to look at things and process from there. But at any rate, welcome. Good to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So I thought we just kind of start off a little bit. I just found it interesting going back to, YouTube. So you started your channel in like 2006, and it just a big thing that I was really attracted to was just, kind of, I use a saying a lot. I stole it from someone probably a lot smarter than me, but does the person have a heart of a teacher? And I think that's something that really comes through in a lot of your videos and training. So I'm just curious out there, you're coming up on almost 80 million views pretty soon on your channel overall. So when you started in 2006, like, what was the original vision and kind of thought when you kind of got things rolling on YouTube with your channel?
Well, I think, probably when I originally started in 2006, I was just creating an account to post something up there, right? It wasn't really, I really started posting in some real way, probably 2011, 2012 was probably when I really started actually, like, I'm going to post stuff up for a specific purpose, because I had a blog at the time and things like that. And so that was when it started off. And it really just became an extension of just, like, I had a blog going. I was making videos originally for my students, kind of, because it was like, hey, these are drills that we're working on, that kind of thing. But I never went into it with any sort of like, it's going to be like, I don't even know how many views or followers are on it right now. It's like, I just do it. And, there's some metrics I'll look at, but overall, like, it just, I don't know. I was doing it to help out my students. And then along the way, some people came into it and I started asking questions, and then it kind of just grew from there. I didn't really have any massive expectations for it.
No, it seems to come up a lot with people I talk to, where they just kind of are doing what they're passionate about and enjoying, and going from, just kind of getting the ball rolling with things, and then it kind of catches on as it evolves from there. But just talking a little bit about that, I mean, did you, prior to teaching, jiu-jitsu and creating some of that content, what were you doing before, like right before you kind of got into your jiu-jitsu career, and how did that evolution start into jiu-jitsu?
Well, I started wrestling in high school, and in high school wrestling, I can't explain it, but when I was on the mat room, I felt like I was in the place I was supposed to be. It just felt like this felt good. I remember, like, I would mentally, like, everything like positive would be going on during the wrestling season. My grades went up, my sort of attitude was better. And then when wrestling season was over, and at the time in the area, they didn't have a lot of like off-season wrestling options. my grades would start to kind of slag. Like I remember I would be kind of just in a funk, and then wrestling season would come up. I remember like football season was right before wrestling, and I'd be just waiting for it. I can't wait to wrestle the season. I don't even care about football. I just want to wrestle. And as soon as I was back in the wrestling room, it was like, there we go. I feel good again. And I remember my senior year in high school, I was having that kind of dip after the wrestling season was over. And I started researching because I wanted to fight. As a young guy, and I thought I wanted to fight MMA. And so I started researching jiu-jitsu gyms because I was like, well, if I'm going to fight mixed martial arts, if I wrestle, I should take them down so I could submit them. And so I found this gym, and, my senior year of high school, I started training. And as soon as I was back in that room, this was a jiu-jitsu, gym that was ran by a former wrestler. And it was like a bunch of like wrestlers were in there, college wrestlers, everything else. So it was like I don't think I would have done well in a jiu-jitsu gym where we had to bow 6 times to this person and then step on the mat, and very formal. It's not my thing. I like being in the wrestling room. Like that's what I was used to. And so I get back in there, it's like, boom, we're back. And so from that moment, I was just hooked. Someone actually asked me the other day, they were like at the tournament, they were like, Chewy, how did you decide to make jiu-jitsu your thing? Like, I don't know that I decided. It just sort of I think it decided for me. It was like, it was there. I think all of us have some sort of natural thing. And if we can find out whatever that is in us that we have a passion for, we have some sort of drive to do, then you just kind of do it. You don't necessarily need some sort of crazy motivation or discipline to do it. You just want to do it. And so from that point on, jiu-jitsu sort of became this sort of focal point of everything else. I would, have job interviews, and it would be like, what's your schedule? And that doesn't work with my training schedule. I'm not taking that one. My school schedule when I was in college for a brief bit was centered around jiu-jitsu. It was basically everything. So, I had jobs and stuff like that, and then worked in, basically at one point I was my last job right before I went full time, in 2010 was working in essentially call center where I was doing the sort of the HR stuff. I'd worked in tech support and then went up a little bit, and then was working I was there for a month afterwards. And then it was like, oh, I'm going to go full time into the gym. So it was call center tech stuff. And so that was the last job that I had before I went into this full time.
Oh, that's awesome. I was originally getting involved in strength sports. So I was kind of just reminiscing where I was fortunate that, there's an exercise science field that I could plug into it. There's some overlap, but I do remember thinking of meal times because it was so obsessive with meals.
Sure.
In the bodybuilding world, it was just all right, how do you guys manage breaks? Well, we don't really have breaks. You're commissioned. And I was like, perfect, sign me up. Because it was I can't. In my head, I'm such a meathead. I'm can't miss my meals.
No, dude, that's a real thing. If you're trying to gain weight, if you're trying to get bigger, that's a legit thing,
right? I'm I'd rather live on a cardboard box than miss a meal, so I don't need to make any money. But
yeah, it's funny. I don't think people really realize if they've never gone through a really intelligent, we're actually going to gain weight the right way. Because most people in America, they don't want to gain weight; they want to lose it. Sure. But if you've ever done a bulk where you're trying to be clean about it, you're eating good food, it's hard, man. You got to eat a lot of food. So those meal times are important.
That's the I think one of the biggest misconceptions people have about real physique sports is I don't even think even the most kind of, I guess, novice kind of ideas about physique manipulation. Everyone knows losing body fat sucks. There's no one that's shocked to hear that the reduction of calories and things can't be a pisser. But I think everyone assumes gaining weight is eating as much pizza and burgers as you can. And they're that sounds great. It's no. Actually, to do it not like the man tit frat guy that down the street who just is fat, then pretends to be a bodybuilder. To really put on weight is really, really difficult. It asks a lot of you.
I remember setting an alarm too. It was, luckily I was single, but I'd set an alarm in the middle of the night because we had back then it was olive oil and protein because I was trying to get extra fat. That was easy. And you just have it next to your nightstand and just chug it in the middle of the night. There's all kinds of stupid things I did. I had wonderful breath.
I would take the early 2000s olive oil, stomach discomfort any day over the micro amount of too much MCT oil where you
a blowout,
crippling pain where you're also smashing diarrhea into the bottom of the bowl.
Good stuff. Well, I think just kind of going a little bit off of that because you won the no-gi pan champs, 3 different weight classes.
Mm-hmm.
When, so obviously performing at a very high level, but then in 3 different weight classes. Just on the topic of weight, I guess is kind of a good transition. Is how did you manage that? Was it just more natural evolution as you were maturing, growing, or was there like a certain goals and strategy around physique, etc.? Like how did because 3 different ones is stretches out quite a bit. So what did that look like for you?
Well, for the first 2, there really wasn't a lot of strategy. So the first 2 I weighed in around the same weight, which was about 210. So the first time I won it was at super heavy, which for IBJJF weight class in no-gi, that's 215 cutoff. And then I ended up for when I was competing again a couple of years later, I went to my buddies in St. Louis to train. And while we were training, I figured out that one of the guys I was training with was in the same weight class as me. Same division, same weight class. I'm like, oh, I was like, I don't think it's kosher that I'm here training with you and then I'm getting ready to compete against you. So I said, man, I'll just move up. I'm like, whatever. I already won at one. I'm also one of these guys. I really don't necessarily like care to win something over and over and over again the same way. I'm like, well, maybe let's go up a weight. Let's see if I can go win heavyweight. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
And so I went to ultra heavy, which is the unlimited weight class, and went up against some big fellas. And, they were about 240. One guy looked 240. One guy looked like he was every bit of maybe 300 pounds, but, beat some big guys. And so I didn't really change the weight at all. I was just like, I'm just going to go up and weight. Let's see if we can have some fun. Now, the one 2020, which is at heavy, I actually did change. So it was like around the COVID times where everybody's gaining a couple lbs around the stomach and stuff. And, I was like, well, I'd never worked with a nutrition coach before and really never dialed that stuff in. I always ate well and everything else, but never really understood how food truly affects me. So I hired him. And, I was like, I want to get down to this weight class for this competition, and let's just get leaned out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got on the diet and everything else. It was amazing because it was probably the easiest weight cut I've ever done. Like when I was younger, it would just be like, eat less food, train harder. So you're having this like sort of inverse of less food to support and then harder training volumes. And you're always getting banged up and sick. But with this, it was like, we cut out like any bullshit. And then it was basically, I was eating a crap ton of food because you're eating, nutritionally dense food, but it's not necessarily the most calorically dense, right?
Sure,
so you think of like, you can eat you think about carbs wise, right? Like, and you guys know this, but I can eat a bowl of blueberries and you're getting like, 20 carbs or something, you know what I mean? Whereas like you get like one Pop-Tart, that's like 35 carbohydrates, right? Plus, some other stuff. So, was eating that kind of stuff, was able to fuel my body, feel great for training, lost weight, and got pretty lean, and went to a lower weight class and competed and won that. And so that one was the one where I actually changed something up. The other ones were basically just, the first one was just to compete, and the second one was to avoid, having to fight with my buddy, and just a test. So.
Oh, it makes sense.
Very magnanimous of you.
Well, I mean, again, I made, we were literally in the rolling room, and I just felt like, I was like, man, this is kind of shitty of me because I'm in their gym training with them, and getting something from them, and then I'm going to compete against you in a couple months. I'm like, I'll just, and for me, I've gone to heavier weight classes before. I remember there was one tournament I went into when I was like a brown belt, and I remember I stepped on the scale with a hoodie on and just was like, I don't really care, put me wherever I'm at. And the weight cutoff for whatever reason, this weight cutoff was like 213 and up. There was no like thing in between. So I stepped on the scale and I was 214, and I could have just taken the hoodie off, but I was like, whatever, where does that put me at? And they're like, oh, you're in the heaviest weight class. I'm like, oh, well, let's find out what happens. And ended up going against dudes that were just, I ended up winning the tournament, which was good. But I mean, the dudes were massive. And I don't think, whenever I think about a competition, that one in particular, I've never been more sore from a competition because I literally had to play guard the entire time. And the guys were like 300, 275, 250, just falling on me. You know what I mean? Just massive dudes. So, it's fine. It's fine.
Mike often talks about how much he likes massive college D1 wrestlers that just come into his gym and train with him. Right, Mike? How fun that is.
It's fantastic. I think like you were saying earlier, there's such a people who are maybe not familiar with grappling sports, there's such a divide, not only with how your style of jiu-jitsu but kind of culturally, like the more traditionalist, the gi wearing kind of traditionalist, and then a very kind of usually a very American based idea that it's just almost like modern catch wrestling. And certainly being out here in the Austin area, I see such a dramatic shift in the cultural aspect of jiu-jitsu. Like there's so many places where I go train where they can't even fathom that there would be things that are related to judo. I mean, it's just completely, it's wrestling practice with submissions, with the ground game. And I find it so interesting, A, and then also B, it kind of changes how imagine if you were into, say, bodybuilding, and then just by virtue of where you were in the country, you essentially had to do a complete powerlifting program. You're just like, I'm not really interested in powerlifting, but I guess this is the deal. Having that is such a dramatic shift of coming from Crone Gracie's school when I was living in LA, where everything was very, very jiu-jitsu based, very fundamental. Hickson and Crone were so committed and so disciplined to making sure the tenets of like the traditional ideas of Gracie jiu-jitsu were very, very intact. To now I train at Tim Kennedy's school in Austin, and it's like I'm at college wrestling practice, and I've never worn a singlet in my life, so it's been quite a shift.
Because it's just like you said with lifting, it's like you're still lifting weights, but now you're going for some higher reps, and it's a little different than what it was before, right? It is interesting. I like we do gi, like my gym, we do gi and no gi, and there's still obviously like we have there's still like in the gi stuff, there's a lot of judo going on because that's where it derives from, the grip fighting and everything else, and we adjusted. But I definitely, and maybe it's just because that was my exposure, right? Because if I had the exposure that you had, where you came from a more traditional gym, it might be, more of a preference. But for me, I always just liked that feeling where you come in and like you get to walk through the doors, turn your brain off. We don't have to have too many rules, and we just as long as we're like being cool, we're being clean, everything else, and let's just get in there and let's get after it. Do you think you prefer the more traditional sort of and there's no right or wrong, but do you prefer more traditional like structure, or do you like the more laid back sort of wrestling room feel?
I like the more top game based wrestling type stuff, even though I'm way not as good at it, because like I said, I've never wrestled a day of my life. Simply because I've never really been good at stuff in my life that didn't involve some level of like sweat equity. Right? I'm certainly not a fluid or high. It's hard to explain. I was on Dance with the Stars, and then it was this terrible transition. But everybody was worried, like, are you going to be good because you're kind of like stiff? And I go like, no, I'm going to be terrible, but I have impeccable rhythm. I grew up as a musician, and my hand-eye coordination is very high. I'll go without any practice. I haven't played hard fast pitch in 15 years. I'll go to the batting cage. I'll crank right now. It's just that my movements are not fluid, and I have no control over that. So being that that's the case, I was never good. I was never like a naturally good wide receiver, defensive back, but I'm also little. So I had to figure out ways to do things where I could it's all about effort. If I work really hard, I can do this. And playing gi against a guy, playing like traditional gi style on my back in guard is not very good against a guy who's much better than me fundamentally. But if I go like right now, I'm just gonna put my head into his chest and I'm gonna try really hard. That always made sense to me, and I said, even though I'm not naturally as good at it because I haven't been doing it as long, I like that concept of like biting down on your mouthpiece and just trying. Just going.
Well, some of the things you said earlier, I was going to kind of, I guess, start really broad with this question, but I am really curious because I hear this a lot with common themes with people in areas of success. And so I remember a good friend of mine, Mike knows him well, used to talk about like, if you can compete at a high level, and in his sport, he was more strength sports and bodybuilding, he said, you can basically do anything in business. Like he was just saying that, it's so hard to prep it, the discipline, the things that are thrown at you, the obstacles, like a lot of other things in life, generally speaking, are going to be pretty manageable. So I guess a couple part questions, like one is, have you found that, your jiu-jitsu game, your competitiveness, I guess the first one is like how that translates to other areas of your life and maybe challenges, and how does that, help you, or do you pull from that when you're looking at, business, family life, etc. And I'm just kind of curious a little bit about that. And then I have a couple follow-up thoughts that are related to that topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think from like the thing from like wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and I've heard wrestlers say this a lot too, it's like, when you go through like a tough practice, or you have a tough match where maybe you're staring at some giant human being with muscles up to his ears, and you're looking at this guy and you're like, oh my God, like this is the guy I'm going against. And then you overcome that, you beat the person. I mean, there's been guys where I've been like, oh my God, like I'm nervous for this one. Or, MMA fighting camps where like you're training for 8 to 6 weeks, and sometimes you're like laying in I'd be so banged up from all the kickboxing stuff. I'm limping around, sitting in a hot, bath, trying to like relax my muscles a little bit. When you do that, then it's like, okay, I have to like grind for a little bit on the computer and get some work done.
Right.
This is easy, right? Like, it's like, like my son's like 2. So like, he's at that stage where he wants to run around. It's like, like I can do this for days. Like he's energetic, but bro, like you're not like, it's not like training for a fight camp. You know what I mean?
Right,
So like
right.
everything that I go to, that's like kind of my comparison to it, is that like, I always sort of go back to that, like, how difficult is this? It's not as difficult as this stuff was. This stuff was really hard. This is just, you just got to sit down and do the work. Right. And then
Right.
there's also the fear, right? Because a lot of times, anytime we get into something new, there's a lot of times fear associated with it. Because for different reasons. And I remember, so many times with grappling, fighting, and everything else, there being fear associated with it, like a nervousness and anxiety, a what if kind of situation. And you sort of just become very comfortable with that, and you don't really worry about it too much. Like, what happens? Who gives a shit? If it's something bad happens, we'll deal with it,
Right.
because it's not the end of the world. Like we dealt with this so many times. And so you become comfortable with those kinds of feelings that like pit in your stomach where you're unsure of things. And so those things, I know, like I know a ton of situations where I've literally been on situations, everything from like making the leap into doing the gym stuff full time to being on a date with a woman that I thought was really attractive. And, I'm like, oh, here we go, whatever. And then thinking about like, it's not a 300-pound man that's trying to choke me, right? Like, I'll be all right. We'll be all right. And so that kind of stuff, that mentally being able to deal with hardship and put one foot in front of the other, then also the ability to deal with fear and anxiety. For me personally, those have been useful in basically insert whatever aspect of my life you want to throw out.
I too have been so tempted to just Darce choke a woman when she rejects me. And it really does create, it really makes you a better man when you're able to resist that, because it would be so easy.
Oh man, that's good. What do they call that? What is it? Assault?
I did say this thing. Is this thing on? I didn't say that out loud. No, on a more serious note, though, you
we won't edit just that part out. I don't. We won't do that to you. Just put that out there on blast.
You brought up something though, seriously, about how a fight camp, especially, people talk about being in good shape and they'll see like a guy with abs and something, but being in fight shape is a completely different game. It's almost hard to fathom unless you've either been around men and women prepping for combat sports or you've done it yourself. It does make everything else in the world get the volume turned down, and that's fantastic. But then also, how do you manage fatigue? Because it's so extreme from doing that even though doing, posting some stuff on your YouTube probably doesn't seem that challenging to you, it's probably hard to even keep your eyes open or even stay in a good mood, right? Doing it when you're in that level.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough there. I remember fight camp, a lot of times what would be pushing me would be just like fear. It's like, I'm thinking about this guy that I'm fighting, and anytime I would have that moment of, well, I can't do this, then I would think about, well, that guy's training. He's training somewhere. He's getting better. What are you doing?
Right.
And so, all right, we got to keep going. We got to do more. And now a lot of times when it comes to work, and maybe this is not always the good thing, but I'm generally pretty good about knowing my limits at this point where I can kind of back off when I need to, because you're right. You do have to manage fatigue, because if you take it too far, you can get injured. You can, get sick before fight camps. A lot of bad stuff can happen. And then, when we get into other areas of our lives, we can get burnout in different things. But, I'm pretty good about my limits. But now it's, if there's a moment where I'm, maybe not going to do something, I'll think about my wife or my kid,
Right.
or my students or something, and say, you going to let them down?
Right.
Or are you just going to not do it today because you don't really feel like it, and you're going to let those people down? Like, get your ass up and go do it, so you just take that same sort of like holding yourself accountable to something more than yourself, and then just transferring it over, instead of it being like getting ready for this fight that I have, right? And then now it's like the people that I'm supporting. Well, now we have to do it for them and not necessarily just me. So
yeah, it's interesting. Like when you were talking about that, there was that story of the Stoic philosopher that was, extremely wealthy, and once every, 3 or 4 months would just take next to nothing, take like rags for clothing, and go
Seneca,
to
yeah,
Seneca, yep. And he would just go to the the dusty old off the beaten path place and live there and sit there. And I think the saying was like, all the while pondering, is this what I feared the most? Or I'm sure I hacked that quote, but it's like getting yourself into that mindset of like, like you said, like, I'm in a business meeting, I'm trying to close the deal, I'm trying to do this. And you're like, yeah, the 300-pound guy choked the shit out of me once. So I think, and I'm still living after that. So just like getting that mind shift, I think it goes both ways. Like, one, outside of it, but two, what I personally really have enjoyed so far in jiu-jitsu is just, getting so gassed. Like, it doesn't matter how strong I might be, but my neck is still my neck. The amount of pressure you need to put on my artery to cut the blood off my brain is the same as any other guy. So that's happened plenty of times, more times than I can count. And so when I don't want to go, I just think of all those times where, I'm more, even from my thing that gets in my head is not necessarily like losing. Of course that sucks, but it's more like, quote unquote, giving up from fatigue, like that mental monster in my head where I'm like, I know I kind of gave up. Like, I know I could have fought a little bit better, but I was like, well, this is just a practice round. It's cool. Like, I'm just going to chill here. And it took the guy even longer to sink it in. I'm like, gosh damn it. Like, if he would have been faster, I wouldn't have felt like such a wuss, But so when I'm sitting there, I'm like, I don't want to go. I'm like, no, like, I just don't because, fatigue makes cowards of all of us. Right. So it's like,
that's right.
That feeling, man, I just, it's just that mental barrier. Cause I'll go to that mental space, I guess, is my point. And I think a lot of people, maybe they're not as demented as me, but I like to go to those spaces, and it helps. And it sounds like you kind of do the same thing. It just helps refocus you. So you're like, wait a minute, am I going to let my students down? And of course your students probably like, oh, you're not letting us down, whatever. You're like, but that's not the fuel you need right now. You don't need to hear everyone's understanding. You need to be hard on yourself to kind of, push forward. So, so I just found that pretty interesting there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the idea of like like for me, like if the gym business fails and they don't have a gym to train at, I am letting them down, right? Because I've seen so many people like where their gyms fall apart, and it's like, dude, these people depended on this. This was their place to go to, their friends and everything else, and now they're scattered without their little family. So, going back to what you had, that place you have to go to, that I call that the little voice,
right?
That little voice that starts to creep up and it's telling you to do the thing that you shouldn't do, or the thing you don't want to do, to become the person you're trying to become. But sometimes it wins. But you have to get there. And sometimes in jiu-jitsu, you just don't have a choice. You're forced there because someone's basically throttling you, and they're beating the crap out of you. You don't have a choice.
Right.
But it's a beautiful thing, because a lot of people don't get there at all. And so when something comes in at them, they have no practice with that feeling. They have no practice of being there, because, in those moments, the more you're there, the more you're able to kind of become used to it and comfortable with it. It's like being in a headlock, someone's squeezing your head and they're on top of you in the bottom of like basically side control. There's this squeezing your head, trying to squeeze it off like a grape. In the beginning, that's a kind of a crazy position. You don't know how to position your body. You feel like you can't breathe. And eventually he's just kind of, I remember this one day, like rolling, and I feel this guy on top of me squeezing, new guy, and he's holding my head. His arms are shaking because he's squeezing me, but I'm positioned correctly, so it's not doing any damage. And I'm just kind of laying there, letting him use his energy up.
Right.
And I'm thinking to myself, man, I remember this position used to bother me. Now it's like
Right.
I'm laying here very casually thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch while this guy's like squeezing with 100% of his effort on my neck. It doesn't bother me.
Right.
And so you learn how to like deal with those things. And I think it's one of the beautiful parts about jiu-jitsu. So you get into those mental places that are uncomfortable and they become very comfortable, right? And then you can take that comfort with discomfort and you can basically take it wherever else you want to.
Right.
It's I mean, I do think, and it's certainly, I wouldn't ever even want to pretend like I understand things in an academy or on the mats like you do, but it's funny
You
to me.
Have some understanding. I mean, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I like to tell Joe, and I think it transfers over into a lot of things in like the fitness and physical activity world, is that I know enough to know how much I don't know. And that's kind of what I wanted to discuss for you, because it's must be very difficult to have started creating content with all the right intent in 2006, right at kind of the tough boom and the kind of explosion and the early development of what has become kind of the Reddit community and the internet online tough guy, because like where bodybuilding and fitness has gone and now removed itself from it, I've found MMA or combat sports in general is at that point. Like I'll watch live commenting if I'm watching UFC and I'm like online and I'm just scrolling, and I'll see people who will say things and I just go like, well, you have no fucking idea what you're talking about, but you're just commenting, spracking off with such insane levels of confidence. And as someone who actually genuinely is at the forefront of understanding, I wonder, A, how do you deal with that with staying looking as the good guy, and then B, also how do you properly make that, where's the dividing line between someone's a douchebag and someone's genuinely unsafe, providing information that's probably detracting from people's ability to grow as a martial artist?
You mean like people that are posting stuff online and they're like sharing videos of stuff and they're not properly like training, sharing bad stuff, or you just mean people in comments?
People, the toxic part of commenting for sure is just how to, as a business owner, I would imagine it's also extremely hard to deal with that aspect of it. But also B, yeah, you have a kid who's motivated and he's working hard, and then he comes back and you're just getting to the point where framing and shrimping is really getting to a spot, and passing guard. And it's like, hey, how do I learn this flying omoplata that I saw on, awesomeraddude.com? Like there's always going to be that draw, especially when people are young and motivated. Young dudes get really sucked into that,
100%. Yeah. So as far as the toxic commenters, you kind of have fun with them. I mean, because again, one, there's sort of a curiosity that I have that if they're even real comments, there's that theory of like the dead internet where there's just bots everywhere. So I wonder, like, sometimes I'm like, are these even real comments? But assuming that they're real comments, it's like some human being is having such a miserable experience with their life that they want to project this out after some people. Because if someone makes a critical post that is thoughtful and they're saying, hey, I thought this, that, whatever, I'll interact with that all day because, we're exchanging ideas and that's cool with me. But when it's just nasty stuff,
right, I
have fun with it, because you're some random miserable person, in mom's basement posting something. Like, it means nothing to me. So I heard a guy, he calls them like trolls, like downstairs trolls. And so you're the way you have fun with that is, maybe you sort of upstairs troll them a little bit, so like, you can kind of get your rocks off that way, or you just ignore them. But I don't really pay too much attention. In the beginning, I remember it bothered me more because it was new. And then eventually it becomes just so normal that now I just don't even think about it. It's like, it's a mean comment from someone. And again, I think about, where did that come from in you? Why would you, because I wouldn't spend the time to post that. Why would you? Because you have nothing going on. So you're sitting around on the internet scrolling all day, wasting your life. You're miserable and you're going to make some nasty post. Have fun. As far as the bad videos, I think the best thing for most like gym coaches and jiu-jitsu coaches is just to make sure that the communication's open, because if like the way my students are now, if they say, hey, I can you show me this move I found in a video? I'm like, yeah, let me bring it here. Let's take a look at it. And we can look at it. And if it's a good move, I'm like, yeah, let me show you. Let's break this down a little bit for you. And you can get a couple reps in with me, and then you can go drill with one of your training partners later to figure it out. But I can also go, dude, don't mess with this. Like I remember years ago, there was some different stuff that would pop up on YouTube where, it would be some weird, funky submission from back mount where you're not even protecting your neck any longer, but somehow you're supposed to get some weird lock. And could it work? Sure, maybe, but again, you're breaking really bad. You're breaking fundamental principles in a bad way. So I saw it one time, and no, don't do this, dude. Don't even worry about this. This is going to get you choked. It might work on one of the white belts once, but it's not going to work about anybody that's worth their salt. It's one of those moves that I call them social media techniques. Where everybody's so desperate for attention that they'll post whatever garbage that they can just to get someone to look. And if it looks kind of neat, people go, ooh. Even though there may not be any substance there. One of my guys, Brandon, and I were talking about this. There was a really bad wrestling technique that was posted up, but it had like hundreds of thousands of views, and people, oh man, that's so cool. But it wasn't a good wrestling technique. And this is coming from like a, 3-time college wrestling champion. So he's got an eye for these sorts of things. And to the untrained eye, to the untrained person, oh yeah, this is great. But to the person that actually knows what they're doing, like, it's no good, man. And you're going to waste your time. So I think the best thing for coaches, if it's our job, is to sort of help people steer through this stuff, because at some point people are going to learn from their sources. So I think if you just keep the door open and just let them talk to you, then you can kind of steer them in the right direction.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think it kind of speaks to me about culture, because that was one of the topics I want to get into. I talked to actually quite a few guys from your gym, and they're, it seems like there's definitely a common thread amongst them. And I think a lot of that comes from the culture at your gym. So I think for those out there that maybe are going to get into jiu-jitsu, they are into it, or maybe they can apply this in the business world or with their teams. I'd just be interested to hear more about, how is the culture established in your gym? How do you kind of, does my culture pass the sniff test? Like, how do you check in on that? Like, what are things that kind of you did to initially set up that culture with your team and the people in your gym? And then how do you keep it going the way that it should be by the way you see it?
I don't know that I did this all intentionally. I think sometimes culture becomes a byproduct of who's ever in leadership. Like, it's just going to start there. If there's a certain sort of energy that this person's giving to it, a certain openness, then that's going to trickle down into all the ranks, right? If you have leadership that's acting a certain way, then the people that are coming in afterwards are going to look up and say, oh, this is how we're supposed to be, because we're humans. It's monkey see, monkey do. Sure. And so I think it's, first things first is just leading by whatever example you want to set. That's how you should be leading, right? So how you train, how you present yourself, everything else, that sort of, it should be the sort of the model that, people can follow after. If you're not going to embody this stuff yourself, then it's like a parent telling your kid, hey, you need to eat better and you need to stop, eating this bad food. Meanwhile, they're eating a Big Mac. Right. Probably not going to work, right? So if the parent's eating good food, the kid's like, this is just what we do, kid, then they're going to follow suit. And so I think part of that is just trying to set a good example and be a decent human being on the mat for other people. Yeah. And then, this is something I've talked about in some of my videos, is that one gym's culture may not be correct for every person. Sure. Some people come to my gym and it's not their vibe, and that's okay. But some people come to my gym and they love it, and they've been there for, 15 years, 16 years. Right. So you got to find the gym that's right for you, and that's different for everybody. And then when you figure out what your gym culture is and what sort of values you actually value the most, right? What your core values are, then it comes down to making sure that you put people in place that have those and are running by those, and also to making sure that you remove the weeds when they pop up. You know, it's unfortunate it happens where sometimes you might have to kick someone out of the gym, or you might have to have a difficult talk with someone who's getting out of hand for some reason or another, but it has to be done if you're going to protect that culture. Because once the culture's gone, especially with something as intimate as jiu-jitsu, where you're this close with each other and you're tugging on joints and chokes and everything else, if there's any bad feelings, it's not a good thing. So again, I don't think it was something that I intentionally like did. I wasn't like, hey, I'm a culture guy, right? Like, I was trying to create an environment that I wanted to be a part of.
Sure.
That I would have wanted to be a part of, and like, let me create that for you guys. And if you like this, so this is going to be great. If you don't like the environment, then it's okay.
Yeah. That was actually one.
It sounds like, sorry, Joe, but I was going to say that it sounds like a common theme. You know, it's not like you intended to get into this as an industry. You didn't intend to get into jiu-jitsu. You really liked high school wrestling, and it just kind of happened. And I think that's a really meaningful. How about you just go after it with intent and respect, and then things kind of fall into place. You didn't have that kind of like a contrived idea for it.
Right. Well, I think so many people, they mess things up because they go into things with, they've got to have some big expectation, some big goals, some big dream, vision, whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to have those things sometimes, but man, sometimes I feel like we get in our way because you can't do anything without, you think about people coming into jiu-jitsu. So many people come into it and they can't just freaking train. They have to like have something to show for it, because our society says you have to have progress. You have to have production. It's like, can you just do something because you enjoy doing it? You know, like for instance, lifting. Like, I mean, I lift weights, 4 days a week. Now, if I never gained another ounce of muscle or changed my body or whatever ever again, I would still do it because I enjoy doing it. I enjoy lifting weights. It makes me feel good. And it's like, it helps me train and everything else. There's a benefit to it. Training, if I never made another ounce of skill gain in my jiu-jitsu, but I still like got the same good feelings, the camaraderie and everything else, I'd still train because I enjoy doing it. I think sometimes like we put these big sort of burdens on ourselves with what we want to do sometimes. And it's fine periodically to do that. But I think like people go into it sometimes and it's like, just do the damn thing. If you enjoy doing it, just keep doing it. And then you can figure things out sometimes afterwards. But I think sometimes people get ahead of themselves with stuff. And I think that maybe to a fault, I did the opposite, where I never really expected anything from myself or what I was doing. I was just sort of following this itch, or that I was trying to scratch. And then when I got into a position of, leadership, or I was the gym owner or whatever, it was just like, well, let me create something that I would want. And hopefully people like this. And if they do, then fantastic. And we'll just see where this goes and just leave it at that, opposed to, I'm going to have the largest gym in the city and it's going to be this, that, what, like,
just whatever happens. No, it's interesting because I was that guy when I first started, because I went to an MMA gym that's very, I would say more based on different gyms or schools I've experienced, very few, but just in my experience, more competitive, if you will. And they didn't really have like a starter program. This is more what they told me. Like, they're just kind of like, you just jump in and do your deal.
Oh, they didn't have a beginner program.
No. So the thing though that I was doing is I was watching YouTube of like the clips that said, don't be this guy. And I'm like, okay, let me watch, because I didn't know the etiquette. So I had to like learn. And then you find out, and I'll get to my question in a minute here, but then you kind of like, I wanted to have good partners to train with. And then some of the higher belts work with me like, no, ask questions. Like, we want to work with you because you're our future training partner, over the course of, as you get better, like my training gets better. So they seem to have that right mindset to kind of pull you along. But I'm curious if there's maybe your, it doesn't have to be numbered, but your top 2 or 3 kind of things for someone, new to jiu-jitsu, or, for maybe how to be a good training partner, etiquette, etc. Someone who's thinking about exploring it, like, what would be some tips or some common, things that you see out of quote unquote good culture gyms or good culture, partners and people to train with?
Yeah, I mean, just off the top of my head, maybe a couple things. I mean, there's lots of stuff you could get into, but one would be just remember, like, winning really is, I mean, like, again, there's nothing wrong with winning and training, but there is no winning and training. Practice doesn't count, right? If you're really big on winning, go compete. In the gym, safety is really important. So me and my training partners, right? Like especially my toughest training partners, where we're literally beating the snot out of each other before like a competition training session or something. No matter how hard we're going, if like one of us accidentally elbows each other, or if we get a submission that's in a weird spot, we'll stop and check on each other. You all right, man? I'm good, man. All right, we'll just keep going, right? Like, but we'll check on each other. It's not this thing where we have to win at all costs. And I think that sometimes newer people, not everybody, but sometimes they forget that, this is this, like, because people come into jiu-jitsu all the time with these flowery ideas of it's going to change my life and da-da-da. I was listening to Jocko or Joe Rogan and they talked about how magical it was. I'm like, all that magic is done through this, as you were talking about, sweat equity. It's done by having your face smashed by a 300-pound dude whose chest hair has now become floss. Like it's not always fun, but this is where it's happening, right? And when we're doing jiu-jitsu, it's fun, but like we're also ripping on each other's joints and we're doing all kinds of stuff. And I think it's just it's a reminder, like, look, no matter how hard you're going, always check in with your partner, because there's like their health and safety is more important than you winning the role.
Right.
And so always just keep that in mind, because you can't get better without them. Right. And if you want people to roll with you more and more and more, and you want them to be like, dude, I want to roll with Joe or Mike, then you better be taking care of them, because if not, you're going to be the guy where as soon as it's like, hey, grab a rolling partner, it's like you flipped on the light and cockroaches scattered.
Sure.
They're like, oh, get away from those dudes, because they rip submissions and stuff. And so that's a big one. And then two, probably like, okay, so we got safety in there. Like, your goal is not to necessarily just win, but to develop your skills, your techniques, your abilities. Right. That's what your focus is. A lot of times people come into training very early on, and this is not really early on, this is all the time, and they have very little focus. They're just all over the place. They're just, and again, this is more of like a training tip. Like at any level like that you're at, if you feel overwhelmed, just like make it smaller by focusing on something. One of my friends, Andy Stumpf, he has this idea of, he says, make the world small, right? Like basically whenever you're dealing with this like overwhelming feeling of whatever's going on, just focus on whatever you have to do right now. Yeah. And if you're in a training session, you're like, man, I'm so overwhelmed by techniques, because everybody says that at the beginning. Well, just like, what's one thing that you could focus on for this rolling session, and that tends to help too, just to, as far as dealing with frustration. But as far as being a good training partner, I mean, the safety one's the biggest.
Yeah.
A lot of things will take care of themselves if you're just being a good, safe training partner to your buddies. And because a lot of the issues that people have, a lot of times are with people that are being unsafe. They're spazzing out. They're, just banging them up or whatever. That's tends to be when they're like, I don't want to roll with this guy.
Yeah.
So
I find that pretty easy as a member of a gym. Certainly, like trying to keep that as a premium, the experience for everyone. But I was curious, how do you deal with that as a coach? Because I would imagine you're confronted. At least I found that I've been confronted with that in my life with my daughter. I don't know about coaching people. How do you confront that very fine line of encouraging someone and pushing someone and not going too far to where you would break them down, and they're like, you know what, I don't even want to do this anymore. You've kind of broken my spirit? Because I would imagine it's a push and a pull of that. You want to inspire someone, and that means you got to kind of push them a little bit, but at the same time, you don't want to push it too far.
I got you. So like how to balance like pushing and motivating someone to do more, to go harder, but at the same time not breaking them.
Especially in combat sports, where pushing them the line of what is too far can be pretty hard to gauge.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's one of those things where I don't know that I can put like give that like concrete, this is the sort of the formula, because it's like, as a coach, when you're dealing with, like, let's say that, like, I remember one fight camp we had where I was coaching all the guys some years ago. Each one of those guys, we had 5 guys on the show, I think it was 5, and each one of them has like a different personality, and different things motivate them, and different things like you gauge where they're at. Like, for instance, we had one guy, this one fella, his name was Nick, was a physical specimen. I mean, the guy was, he was incredible. Like physique wise, he was, everybody would ask me, who's your heavyweight? I'm like, that's our 185er. Like and he wasn't cutting a lot of weight. He was just a massive frame, and he was amazing. He was fast. When he would be on hitting the heavy bags, he would be folding them with his leg. I mean, just like crazy. And when I was in the ring with him, I remember like sparring with him one time. I've got my guard up and he's like punching, and I'm blocking it, but like the strikes, it's so much power to them. It's like reverberating in my bones, right? I'm like, good Lord, like I'm just getting shook up. And then I remember like our 3rd round of sparring, he starts to slow down. I punch him one time. And then he was just like, he starts to get tired. And then he literally turns away from me. He's like, I'm done. and I'm like, done. I'm like, no, dude, you can't be done. This is fighting. Like, you have to. So I started like going, he was like turned away from me. I got behind him and started kind of peppering him in the face a little bit, not hard, but just enough to kind of irritate him. I was like, get back around and turn. And like with him, it was about making him get past that little breaking point and realizing, like, physically, bro, you've got so much more potential. Right. And this guy was like, mentally, he was just like, he was trapped. I don't know what was going on. Like, right before his fight, he's out there and he's dwarfs this other guy that he's getting ready to fight. And he's like telling me, Chewy, man, this guy looks really big. Bro, you're massive. And I'm just keeping him centered, right? Keeping him centered, like talking up, whatever. Some of the other guys are a little bit more muted, right? Some of the other guys, I remember Randy, like before his fights, Stone Cold, dead quiet, showing no emotion. He's got the pit in his stomach just like the rest of us, but just, and we just needed to get a good warm up. And just a little bit of warm up, and just tell me strikes are looking sharp, everything else. Everybody's a little different, and so I think from a fighting standpoint, then you take that back to training. It's just about having a read on your guys and knowing what they're capable of, and knowing when to push them. And in a training session, if we're like doing a comp session where you have like a lot of people training, you start to read the body language. And you know what you've given them last week, what you've given them before, you're building them up, but at the same time, you start to know where those limits are. And so again, I can't quite put my finger on what that is, but you just know when, okay, they're starting to get real sluggish, they're exhausted. You're seeing your toughest guys start to crawl around a little bit. All right, let's dial it back a little bit, and then as far as the motivation goes, just some people are just different, and you just got to figure out what makes them tick, and you can give them that little jolt when they need it, but they're all a little different. I don't know if that answers your question, but and if it doesn't, let me know.
Yeah, for sure. I did want to just, I know we're kind of weaving in and out of life and balancing things, and then training and back and forth. And so I think it's kind of a interesting, definitely an interesting conversation to kind of walk through that. One of the things I did want to make sure I get to today was, I'm just curious about like the merging of Chewjitsu Open. Your vision for kind of that brand, I guess, would be like one part, but then the second part I'm interested to talk about. And I was talking to Jeff Alexander the other day, and we were talking about his schedule, and I'm just curious to know about your schedule, because I was talking to him about he trains and teaches and he's got a family and work and day job, but like, how do you approach high level? How do you prioritize things, knowing you have Chewjitsu Open, you have your gym, you have your training, you have a family, young son? Like, can you just kind of walk through productivity at a high level, and then maybe we can get into the Chewjitsu Open and how that ties into your vision for jiu-jitsu and what you'd like to see?
Yeah, as far as the vision for the Chewjitsu Open, like most of the things I've done, I don't really have one. It's what happened is I had this idea for a tournament format, and the regional tournaments, the thing that they're plagued by is you go and sometimes the divisions are very small and you don't get a lot of matches. Right. So I was like, well, I want to create a format where they get lots of matches, and I wanted to create a format where people could tap into the feeling of turning off their brain, not worrying about points, not worrying about weights, just go compete and go test yourself. And that was the sort of, if I could do that, then I was like, the competitors can then take that sort of tapping into that particular feeling, take that over to other point-based competitions, and they'll have known what it feels like to just turn your brain off and compete, and that could be very useful. And then as far as the format was just let's throw out the points and all this stuff, let's just do jiu-jitsu and go after it, and let's fight. And the results have been pretty good, where we're holding typically a 70 to 75% finish rate. So 3 out of 4 matches get finished because people are just going for it.
Right.
And that's it. So, in where it goes from there, I don't know. It's just, for me, it's, let's see if people even like it. If people like it, fantastic. And if they don't, then we'll figure it out from there. So that's kind of that. As far as the schedule goes, I don't know that I have any sort of magical thing. I'm a little bit more chaotic than some people, I think. And I like it that way. I'm probably more of like the creative slant person. Like,
sure,
when I look at jiu-jitsu, I don't think of it as like some engineering like thing. I'm like, intuition. Let's feel it out,
Right.
And so the things that have been helpful, one, because I am busy. There's a lot of traveling. There's a lot of stuff going on. We're doing the Chewjitsu Opens. We're doing my gym. There's the internet stuff. There's my training. And if I'm getting ready for a competition, that's a sizable chunk of the day in training. I try to focus like having chunks of time blocked that have a specific purpose. So for instance, like right when we're done here, it'll be breakfast time with the family. So I'm going to go up there. We'll have breakfast together. We do every morning and we have breakfast together. And then later on in the afternoon, if I'm working later in the evening, then I'll have like another chunk of time where it's family time. It's like me, the wife and the kid, we get to hang out for these chunks of time throughout the day that are sort of stuck there. And then I have 2 blocks of time that get used for everything from making programs for the gym, writing emails that need to get written up for the marketing stuff that I do, recording videos, whatever that creative stuff needs to be done. There's 2 chunks of time for that. And then there's my training time and teaching, which those chunks are in there too. And so those are all blocked in. And so I can use, they're versatile where I can change them up depending on what I need to get done that day. So maybe there's a Chewjitsu Open coming up and I need to get a video out for it. Well, I don't get to, there won't be any emails written today. It'll be video recording for that coming up. Or, maybe I had a coach change classes or something and I need to get some information to him. Well, we're not making videos a day. We're doing that. So it allows me some like flexibility there, but still have some sort of structure to work within. Because if I get too rigid, I get sort of like stuck. I don't like it. And so for me, I like having like options. And so I think a beautiful part about what I have going on is that I have several different sort of businesses that I'm involved with, and all of them sort of scratch each other's backs. But at the same time, I enjoy everything that I'm doing, right? Like I enjoy the act of writing the stuff that I write. I enjoy recording videos. I enjoy, making plans for the gym, for the coaches and everything else. And I can just cycle through them. So if I get stuck on one thing one day, I'm like, we'll come back to this tomorrow. Let's go back to here, unless it needs to be done. So that's kind of how I do it, is like prioritizing what's important to me, like, the gym, the business and family and stuff like that. And then finding places where that's always there. So I get to make sure they're being taken care of.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah. It seems like batching your time or whatever is kind of the theme that I kept thinking of when you were saying that, is just like how to shift those focuses. Like I'm focused on the family now, I'm focused on the gym now, I'm focused on the content, but it's like batching it, I think is a good just kind of productivity hack for people out there, just to try to like, how do people get all this stuff done, just kind of put some thought into chunking it. But I think the drive and the passion of what you enjoy is,
well, you also, the more you do things, the more efficient it becomes.
Right.
Like back in the day when I first started doing videos, it would take me forever to do a video. Back in the day, like to come up with a lesson plan, I would like scratch my head and like sort of stew over this thing. Now it's like I can do it quick because I've done so much of it. I've got those reps in. It's like the first time you do a jiu-jitsu technique, it's all sloppy and you're having to think about it. And does my arm go for here? Do I grab this? And eventually armbar becomes like armbar. You're literally you can shrimp down the mat as if you're like walking. It's like that effortless. So the more you do the things, I think that's a big thing. The more you do things and you get that rhythm going, the simpler, the easier, and the faster they become as well.
Awesome. Well, speaking of schedule and time batching, I know you have the family waiting for breakfast there, so I think it's a good transition there. But Mr. Catherwood, any closing thoughts or comments?
No, it was just it was really, really nice talking to you, and I really appreciate and admire your take on everything, not just on the mats or in the ring, but that approach to following your passion, but not having necessarily being adhering to those rigid ideas and seeing where it may go. I think is really, really beautiful and meaningful advice.
Well, cool. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, good stuff. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll have more ways to follow Chewy and the Chewjitsu and Chewjitsu Open all in the show notes at the end. But thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it, fellas.
Thank you so